Auntie, please do not hang up. They locked the door and it is so cold in here. The whisper on the other end was faint against the howling blizzard outside my window. It was my niece Lily. She had not eaten in 2 days. Shattering their custom mahogany door that night ignited a war that ended with them in handcuffs. I am Naomi, 33, and a forensic accountant. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if blood does not give anyone the right to abuse a child. It was 11 p.m. during a brutal New England blizzard. The wind was shrieking against the glass of my apartment. I was reviewing spreadsheets when my cell phone vibrated. The caller ID showed my father home landline. A knot instantly formed in my stomach. My father Richard and mother Catherine never called me. They were too busy playing perfect socialites to bother with the daughter who refused their country club charades. I answered expecting a pocket dial. Instead, I heard the ragged, terrified breathing of a child. Auntie Naomi. The voice cracked into a whimper. Lily. I shot up, knocking my coffee mug onto the floor. Sweetheart, where are you? Why are you using the landline? I found the phone in the hallway before they locked me in. She sobbed. It is so dark, Auntie. I am scared and my tummy hurts bad. I have not had dinner or breakfast. They locked you in. My mind raced, struggling. Where are my parents, Lily? Where is your grandmother? They dressed up and left hours ago, she whispered. Auntie Beatrice yelled at me to stop crying loudly. Then she pushed me in the dark room and turned the lock. Please come get me. It is so cold. The temperature outside was dropping below 0. If they had locked her in an unheated part of the house, she was in serious danger. I am coming, Lily. I promised, grabbing my car keys and winter coat. Hide the phone. Wrap yourself in whatever you can find. I will be there soon. I sprinted to my car and slammed the vehicle into gear. The drive to my parents' massive estate should have taken half an hour. I did it in 15 minutes, driving like a maniac through blinding whiteout conditions. My tires slid on unplowed roads, but pure adrenaline kept my hands steady. My heart pounded against my ribs with absolute fury. Lily was the daughter of my older brother David, who had died in a horrific car accident just 1 year ago. He had been the only person in our family who ever treated me with genuine kindness. When he passed away, my parents had moved with ruthless speed to take custody of Lily, tearing her away from her mother Jasmine. They claimed they wanted to provide the child with a stable, loving environment. I knew the truth. They only wanted control over the massive trust fund David had left behind, but I never imagined their greed would escalate to physical torture. I pulled up to their $3 million property. The wrought iron gates were frozen open. The massive 3-story brick colonial loomed in the darkness. Not a single light was on inside. They had left a 7-year-old child completely alone in a dark, freezing mansion during a blizzard. I threw my car into park right on the front lawn and ran through the knee-deep snow toward the side entrance. I pounded my fists against the heavy wood. Lily, I screamed over the roaring wind. Lily, it is Aunt Naomi. There was no answer. I knew my father kept heavy tools in the unlocked mudroom attached to the garage. I grabbed a heavy iron crowbar, ran back to the side door, and smashed it directly into the glass pane next to the deadbolt. The glass shattered outward with a sharp crash. I reached my arm through the jagged hole and unlocked the door. I burst into the kitchen, clicking on my phone flashlight. The house was freezing. My father, notoriously cheap despite his wealth, had clearly turned the thermostat down to save money before leaving for whatever lavish event they were attending. Lily! I yelled, my voice echoing off the expensive marble floors. Where are you? A faint, muffled thud came from the opposite end of the house. I sprinted past the formal dining room, past the grand staircase, and headed toward the guest wing. The sound was coming from the back hallway. I stopped in front of a heavy oak door that led to a narrow walk-in storage closet. It was a space my mother used entirely for storing her out-of-season designer coats. The door was deadbolted from the outside. A heavy brass padlock had been slid through a newly installed latch. They had modified the door specifically to trap her. I raised the crowbar and swung it down on the latch with every ounce of strength I possessed. The metal screamed and cracked. I struck it again and again, fueled by a rage so intense it blinded me. On the fourth strike, the wood splintered and the lock gave way. I ripped the door open. The closet had no ventilation and no heating vent. It was easily 20 degrees colder inside than the rest of the house. Huddled in the farthest corner, curled into a tight ball on the bare hardwood floor, was Lily. She was not wearing a sweater or winter pajamas. She was shivering uncontrollably, wrapped only in a thin, damp bath towel. Her lips were entirely blue, and her small hands were tucked under her arms for warmth. I dropped the crowbar and fell to my knees, pulling her freezing, fragile body against my chest. "I have got you," I whispered, my tears finally spilling hot down my cheeks. "Aunt Naomi has got you, and they will never touch you again." I wrapped my heavy wool winter coat tightly around her trembling shoulders. I scooped her into my arms. She weighed practically nothing, felt like holding a bundle of fragile hollow bird bones. I rushed her straight to the gourmet kitchen, setting her gently on a velvet bar stool. I turned to the massive stainless steel refrigerator and pulled the handle. It did not budge. A sharp metallic clink made me look down. A thick combination padlock had been drilled directly into the custom handles, locking the doors together. My breath caught. I stared at the lock, comprehending the calculated cruelty required to drill a padlock into a $10,000 refrigerator just to ensure a grieving 7-year-old could not access a glass of milk. This was deliberate systemic starvation. My hands shook as I tore through the mahogany pantry cabinets, praying they were unlocked. Thankfully, they swung open, revealing shelves fully stocked with expensive groceries. Bypassing imported truffles and artisanal snacks meant for my mother high society book club, I grabbed a simple can of chicken noodle soup. I threw it into a pot on the gas stove and turned the burner on high. The entire time I worked, Lily sat perfectly still, her wide, terrified eyes tracking my every single movement. "Is it okay, Auntie Naomi?" she asked, her voice a raspy whisper. "Grandma Catherine says the food here costs too much money for little girls who do not appreciate their blessings. Beatrice says I am a parasite." Nausea washed over me, hearing my unemployed 30-year-old sister call a child a parasite. I poured the steaming soup into a bowl. "You can eat whatever you want, Lily," I said, keeping my voice steady to hide the violent rage churning inside my chest. "Please eat slowly." She grabbed the spoon with shaking hands, eating with a desperate, ravenous speed that shattered my heart. I rubbed her back as the warm food brought color back to her pale cheeks. While she ate, I checked my phone. If my parents and Beatrice were not home, where exactly were they hiding during a state of emergency blizzard? I quickly opened Instagram. My blood turned to solid ice. There on my screen was a perfectly staged photo uploaded 45 minutes ago. My mother, Catherine, and my sister, Beatrice, stood in front of a glittering ice sculpture at the Grand Drake Hotel in downtown Chicago. They were dripping in diamonds, wearing custom silk gowns, holding crystal flutes of champagne. My father, Richard, stood behind them, looking like a distinguished patriarch in a custom tuxedo. The sickening caption read, "Honored to chair the annual Winter Hope Charity Gala tonight. Giving back is everything. Thinking of our departed David tonight. Raising his sweet orphan daughter Lily has taught us the true meaning of sacrifice and unconditional love. Hashtag blessed family." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with rage. The hypocrisy was suffocating. They were 300 miles away, soaking up the admiration of Chicago elite society, playing the tragic, heroic grandparents. They were accepting praise and financial donations, while the very child they used as a sympathy prop was locked in a freezing closet eating nothing for 2 days. They had flown to another state for a glamorous weekend, leaving a helpless 7-year-old trapped in a winter storm without heating. I clicked on Beatrice's profile next. The so-called golden child had posted a video twirling in a $10,000 designer gown. The caption read, "Sometimes you need a luxury getaway to decompress from the stress of motherhood duties." Motherhood duties. Beatrice had never cooked a meal in her entire pampered life. Yet she was publicly claiming the exhaustion of raising David child while privately locking that same child in a closet to silence her crying. It was an orchestrated facade. To the outside world, Richard and Catherine were wealthy, benevolent saviors, rescuing a child from a tragic fate. They used David's death as social currency to elevate their status. They used Lily as an accessory to gather sympathy from millionaire friends. But behind the closed doors of their estate, they treated my niece worse than a stray dog. They were actively breaking her spirit, starving her body, and torturing her mind. I set my phone down on the cold marble countertop. The image of their smiling fake faces was burned into my retinas. I looked back at Lily. She had finished the bowl of soup, carefully scraping the bottom with her spoon, terrified to leave a single drop behind. Her small hands finally stopped their violent trembling. The heavy wool of my coat provided the warmth her own grandparents had violently denied her. I realized then that taking Lily and simply driving away was not enough. If I just took her home, my father would use his dirty lawyers to twist the narrative. He would claim I kidnapped her. He would use his wealth to bury the truth and continue playing the victim, ensuring Jasmine never saw her child again. No running away was the strategy of a victim. I was a forensic accountant. I dismantled corrupt empires for a living. I tracked missing money through labyrinths of lies and exposed corporate criminals who thought their wealth made them untouchable. My parents had built a fortress of lies, thinking they were invincible. They thought no one would ever look behind the curtain. I took the empty bowl from Lily and set it in the sink. I walked over to the kitchen island and pulled out one of the heavy oak chairs. I sat down in the dark, listening to the storm rage against the windows. I was certainly not going anywhere tonight. I was going to sit right here in the freezing dark living room and wait for them to walk through that shattered door. I was going to look them dead in the eye and watch their perfect socialite facade shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The grand clock in the hallway chimed twice. It was exactly 2 a.m. Lily had finally fallen asleep on the leather sofa, wrapped tightly in my coat. I sat frozen in a wingback chair facing the foyer, waiting in the freezing darkness. Heavy tires crunched on the icy driveway. Headlights swept across the frosted windows. The sound of muffled laughter and clinking keys echoed from the front porch. The heavy mahogany double doors swung open. A gust of freezing wind blew inside, followed by my family. They were practically glowing with arrogant satisfaction. Catherine wore a floor-length silver gown and a white fur stole. Richard was unbuttoning his tailored tuxedo jacket. Beatrice stumbled slightly, giggling as she kicked off her diamond-encrusted heels. The air instantly filled with the sharp metallic scent of expensive champagne and heavy designer perfume. Richard hit the light switch. The massive crystal chandelier flooded the foyer with blinding light. Their laughter died instantly when they saw the shattered glass from the side door scattered across the marble floor. Then their eyes locked onto me, sitting in the dark living room, standing guard over a sleeping Lily. No gasp of horror escaped them, no rush of parental concern. Catherine marched directly toward me, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. Before I could even speak, her hand cracked across my cheek. The slap echoed through the massive room. My head snapped to the side. The stinging pain radiated down my jaw, but I did not flinch. I slowly turned my face back to look at her. "Are you completely out of your mind, Naomi?" Catherine shrieked, her face twisted in rage. "You broke into our house like a common criminal. Look at my custom glass door. Do you know how much that cost to replace?" I stared at her, ignoring the burning on my cheek. I pointed at the broken glass and then at the shivering child on the couch. "You locked a 7-year-old girl in an unheated closet during a blizzard," I said, my voice dangerously low. "She had a padlock on the refrigerator. She has not eaten in 2 days." Beatrice rolled her eyes, stepping into the living room and tossing her thousands of dollars clutch onto a chair. "Oh, please do not be so dramatic, Naomi. She is a total liar. I gave her a granola bar this morning. She was being an annoying brat, whining about wanting her mother while I was trying to get my makeup done for the gala. I needed peace and quiet. The closet was the only place where I could not hear her crying. I just locked it so she would not come out and ruin my dress. My hands clenched into fists so tight, my nails dug into my palms. My 30-year-old sister had thrown a grieving child into a freezing dark box simply because the sound of her tears was an inconvenience to her beauty routine. Richard stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He looked at me with utter disgust. "You have no right to be in my home, Naomi. We are her legal guardians. We know how to discipline a child who refuses to behave. You barge in here breaking our property and playing the hero. You are trespassing. Get out before I call the police." Discipline. I stood up, stepping directly into my father's personal space. "You call starving a child discipline? You locked a padlock on the food. You left her to freeze while you paraded around Chicago collecting charity checks and pretending to be saints. You used my dead brother's daughter for Instagram likes." Catherine scoffed, adjusting her fur stole. "We are giving her a life her pathetic mother never could. Jasmine is practically living in the slums working minimum wage. We put a roof over Lilyhead. If she wants to live in this house, she has to learn our rules. We do not tolerate spoiled behavior. If a few hours in the closet teaches her gratitude, then so be it. A few hours." I looked at my mother, seeing the absolute lack of humanity in her eyes. "It was not a few hours. You left yesterday afternoon. She was in there for over 30 hours, Catherine. In the dark, in the freezing cold. If I had not driven through the storm, she could have died." Beatrice groaned loudly, examining her manicured nails. "You are always so hysterical, Naomi. Nobody died. You are just jealous because we had a fabulous night raising money and networking with the elite while you were sitting in your boring apartment crunching numbers. Just leave the kid and go home. You are ruining my post-gala high." The shouting woke Lily. She sat up, clutching my coat around her small frame. Seeing her grandparents and Beatrice, she instantly shrank back into the corner of the sofa, trembling violently. She did not reach out for them. She looked at them with pure, unadulterated terror. "I am taking her with me," I stated, grabbing my car keys. "You are unfit to care for a stray dog, let alone a child. She is coming to my apartment tonight. Tomorrow I am calling Child Protective Services." Richard laughed. It was a cold, calculating sound that chilled me more than the blizzard outside. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. "Go ahead, Naomi. Take her out that door. The moment you step off my property, I am dialing 911. I will report a home invasion and the kidnapping of a minor. We have the emergency guardianship papers signed by a federal judge. You have zero legal rights to that child. Who do you think the police will believe? The wealthy, respected philanthropist who just chaired a major charity event, or the estranged, disgruntled daughter who smashed their window in the middle of the night?" His cruel ultimatum hung heavily in the freezing air. The reality of my situation finally crushed me completely tonight. I held Lily tighter against my chest and took a defiant step toward the shattered glass door. I did not care about the howling blizzard outside. I did not care about the freezing temperatures. I only cared about getting my brother David Child out of this house of horrors. Richard did not flinch. He simply raised his phone screen so I could see it clearly in the dim light of the foyer. He had already dialed 911. His thumb hovered over the final one. His face was a mask of absolute cruel certainty. "Do it, Naomi," he whispered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Take another step. By the time you reach the end of the driveway, the police will be on their way. You will be pulled over before you even hit the highway. They will drag you out of your car in handcuffs. You will be charged with breaking and entering destruction of private property and kidnapping a minor. And you know exactly what will happen to Lily." I stopped. My boots crunched on the shards of broken glass. Richard smiled, seeing my hesitation. "She will be ripped from your arms by strangers in uniform. She will be thrown into a squad car and handed over to Child Protective Services. She will spend the night in an emergency foster facility, terrified and surrounded by people she does not know. And by tomorrow morning, my highly paid legal team will present our federal emergency guardianship papers to a judge." The court will apologize to us for the inconvenience and return her right back to this house. You, however, will be sitting in a jail cell with a revoked accounting license and a ruined career." Catherine adjusted her diamond necklace, looking completely bored by the entire interaction. "Listen to your father, Naomi. You always were too emotional. We have the law on our side. We have the money. We have the reputation in this town. You are a single woman who just smashed our window with a heavy iron crowbar. Who exactly is the judge going to view as the unstable threat to this child?" My chest heaved. I looked down at Lily. Her small hands were gripping my coat so tightly her knuckles were white. She was looking up at me with absolute desperation. "Please take me, Auntie," she begged, her voice trembling. "I will be quiet. I will not cry anymore. I promise." Those words tore my heart straight out of my chest. She was bargaining for her safety by promising to suppress her own grief. It was a trauma response trained into her by my own family in a matter of months. I wanted to scream. I wanted to swing the crowbar at my father's smug face. I wanted to burn the entire estate to the ground and dance in the ashes. But I was a forensic accountant. My entire career was built on detaching emotion from facts, calculating risks, and finding the undeniable truth hidden in the fine print. And the terrifying, undeniable truth of this moment was that Richard was entirely right. If I walked out that door with Lily, I would lose her forever. The legal system was a machine that favored the wealthy and the established. My parents had spent tens of thousands of dollars to build a bulletproof legal wall around this child. A sledgehammer and a dramatic rescue would not tear that wall down. It would only get me locked up and leave Lily completely defenseless against Beatrice and Catherine. I had to play the long game. I had to destroy the wall from the inside out, using the only weapon my parents truly cared about: money. I took a deep breath, forcing my racing heart to slow down. I slowly knelt on the freezing marble floor and looked Lily in the eyes. I gently unwrapped my coat from her shoulders. The immediate loss of warmth made her shiver, but I kept my hands firmly on her arms. "Lily, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, fighting the tremor in my voice. "I have to leave tonight without you." "No," she sobbed immediately, clinging to my shirt. "Please do not leave me in the dark again." "I am not abandoning you," I promised, staring fiercely into her tear-filled eyes. "I am going to get help. I am going to get the right kind of help. But right now, if I take you, the police will take you away from both of us. I need you to be brave for just a little while longer. Can you do that for me? Can you be brave like your dad was?" At the mention of my brother David, she sniffled and gave a tiny, hesitant nod. I kissed her forehead, lingering for a second to silently promise her that I would dismantle this family for what they had done to her. I stood up and faced my parents. My emotional breakdown was over. The tears stopped. I looked at Richard, Catherine, and Beatrice not as family members, but as targets. They were no longer my blood. They were hostile entities requiring immediate and ruthless neutralization. Richard lowered his phone, a smug grin spreading across his face. "A wise choice, Naomi. It is good to see you finally using some logic instead of throwing a tantrum. Now get out of my house before I decide to press charges for the broken window anyway." I did not say a single word. I turned on my heel and walked out the shattered door, stepping back into the howling blizzard. The freezing wind whipped my hair across my face and bit through my thin sweater, but I barely felt the cold. The rage burning inside my veins was a massive furnace. I walked to my car, parked haphazardly on their manicured front lawn. I climbed inside, gripping the steering wheel as the engine roared to life. I watched the front door close. The porch lights snapped off, leaving the massive house dark once again. They thought they had won. They thought their money and their legal papers made them untouchable gods in their little Connecticut kingdom. They thought they could starve a child, lock her in a box, and hide behind charity galas and designer clothes without consequence. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten what I did for a living. I tracked hidden assets. I exposed offshore shell companies. I ripped apart fraudulent corporate empires line by line, dollar by dollar. If they wanted to use their wealth as a weapon against a 7-year-old girl, I was going to strip them of every single cent they possessed. I was going to find the rot in their financial foundation, and I was going to detonate it in a federal courtroom. I would leave them with absolutely nothing. I threw the car into reverse and spun the tires in the thick snow backing out of their estate. My first step was crystal clear. A sledgehammer could not break a court order, but a grieving mother fighting for her child definitely could. Tomorrow morning, I was going to find Jasmine. I was going to find my sister-in-law, and together, we were going to tear this toxic family apart. The sun had barely risen over the frozen city when I pulled into the crumbling parking lot of the Southside apartment complex. The contrast between my parents' sprawling $3 million estate and the decaying brick building in front of me made me sick to my stomach. This was where Jasmine lived. This was the reality my parents had forced upon the woman my brother loved more than life itself. I navigated the ice-covered walkways and climbed 3 flights of rusted metal stairs to reach Unit 42. I knocked on the peeling painted door. Footsteps shuffled inside, followed by the rattle of multiple deadbolts. The door creaked open, revealing Jasmine. She looked entirely different from the vibrant, radiant woman who had stood at the altar with David years ago. Her beautiful dark skin was ashen with exhaustion, and deep purple shadows bruised the delicate skin under her eyes. She wore a faded diner uniform from her morning shift and carried the unmistakable heavy scent of industrial bleach from her night shift cleaning offices. She was working herself into an early grave just to survive. "Naomi," she said, her voice tight with immediate defensive suspicion. "What are you doing here? Did Richard send you with another settlement offer? Because you can tell him to go to hell. I am never selling my parental rights. I am not here for them, Jasmine," I said, keeping my hands visible and open. "I am here for Lily. I saw her last night. I saw what they are doing to her." Jasmine froze. The hostility in her eyes instantly shattered, replaced by a raw, desperate panic that only a mother could feel. "What do you mean, what are they doing to her? Is my baby okay?" I gently pushed past her into the cramped one-bedroom apartment and closed the door. The tiny space was impeccably clean but freezing cold as the ancient radiator hissed weakly against the wall. A small framed photo of David holding a newborn Lily sat on the only table in the room, surrounded by towering stacks of unpaid legal bills and court summons. I sat Jasmine down and told her everything. I spared no details. I told her about the blizzard, the shattered glass, the padlock on the refrigerator, and the freezing storage closet. Jasmine buried her face in her hands and let out a guttural, agonizing sob that echoed off the thin walls. It was the sound of a woman who had been systemically broken, pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance. They promised the judge they would give her a life of luxury. She cried, her body shaking violently. They swore under oath that my apartment was a hazard and their mansion was a sanctuary. I placed my hand over hers. "How did they actually win custody, Jasmine? David loved you. You were a wonderful mother. How did a federal judge look at you and decide you were unfit?" Jasmine wiped her eyes, her sorrow hardening into a bitter, exhausted anger. "They bought the verdict, Naomi. The moment David died in that crash, your parents swooped in like vultures. David accounts were temporarily frozen in probate, leaving me with absolutely no access to our funds to pay the mortgage or funeral costs. I was grieving a sudden traumatic loss and panicked about money. Your parents saw their opening and struck." She stood up and paced the small room, pulling a thick legal file from the stack on the table. She slammed it down in front of me. "They hired a team of corporate sharks who specialize in destroying lives. They used my temporary financial panic against me. They painted me as an unstable, erratic woman who could not manage a household. But that was not enough to terminate custody, so they bought an expert." I opened the file and scanned the documents. The paperwork detailed a psychological evaluation conducted by a high-profile child psychologist. The report was a masterpiece of legal assassination. It used coded, racially biased language to frame Jasmine as hostile, aggressive, and emotionally volatile. It twisted her natural, devastating grief over losing her husband into symptoms of severe mental instability. "They paid that psychologist $50,000 as a consulting fee." Jasmine spat, her voice trembling with rage. It was a legal bribe. He testified that my emotional state posed an immediate developmental threat to Lily. He claimed that because I am a black woman raising a mixed-race child in a lower-income neighborhood without David wealth, I would expose Lily to cultural and financial disadvantages. They used my race, my sudden poverty, and my grief as weapons to prove I was negligent. The sheer level of corruption made my blood boil. My parents had weaponized systemic prejudice and their massive bank accounts to legally kidnap a child. They presented themselves to the court as the refined, wealthy white grandparents who could offer Lily private schools and country club stability. The judge, a man who frequently attended the same exclusive charity galas as my father, swallowed the narrative completely. He granted them emergency guardianship and slapped Jasmine with a restrictive restraining order, preventing her from coming within 500 feet of their estate. "I have been working double shifts for 11 months, Jasmine whispered, sinking back into her chair. "I clean corporate offices until 2 in the morning and serve breakfast at the diner starting at 5. Every single dollar I make goes to a cheap public defender who barely looks at my case file before hearings. We lose every single motion. Richard lawyers just bury us in endless paperwork, drowning us in legal fees until I cannot afford to fight back. They are trying to bleed me dry, so I will finally give up." I looked at the towering stacks of court rejections on her table. The system was designed to crush people like Jasmine. It was a machine that rewarded wealth and punished vulnerability. Richard and Catherine knew exactly how to pull the levers of power to get what they wanted. They thought they had won because they outspent a grieving widow. "They made one massive mistake," I said softly, closing the file and sliding it back to her. "They assumed you were fighting alone." Jasmine looked up, her tear-filled eyes searching my face. "Why are you doing this, Naomi? They are your parents. You grew up in that world." "They are not my parents," I corrected, my voice hardening into steel. "They are criminals holding my niece hostage. I am a forensic accountant, Jasmine. I spend my life dismantling fraudulent empires and sending arrogant corporate thieves to federal prison. Richard and Catherine think their money makes them untouchable. They think their charity galas and designer clothes hide the rot underneath. But wealth always leaves a paper trail." I stood up and pulled my laptop from my bag, setting it firmly on her kitchen table. "I am paying for your new legal team," I declared. "We are firing your public defender today. I am hiring the most ruthless, aggressive family law attorney in this state, and I am funding the entire war chest. But before we file a single motion, we need ammunition. My parents only care about one thing in this world, and that is their money. If they use their wealth to steal Lily, I am going to find out exactly where every single dollar in their empire comes from." Jasmine stared at the laptop and then back at me. A spark of hope finally ignited in her exhausted eyes, replacing the overwhelming despair that had consumed her for the past year. "You really think you can find something in their finances?" she asked, her voice breathless. "Richard is obsessed with hiding his tracks. He uses shell companies for everything." I smiled, a cold, calculating smile. There is no such thing as a perfect crime in accounting. Every transaction, every hidden account, every wire transfer creates a digital footprint. If they bribed an expert witness, they had to move the money. If they are funding this legal war, they are pulling the cash from somewhere. I am going to tear their financial records apart line by line until I find the loose thread. And when I pull it, their entire perfect upper-class facade is going to collapse." Jasmine let out a shaky breath, wiping the remaining tears from her face. She sat up taller, her posture straightening as the defeated widow began to transform back into the fierce mother David had fallen in love with. "We need to destroy them, Naomi," she said firmly. "We need to make sure they can never hurt Lily again." "We will," I promised, opening my laptop and booting up my encrypted auditing software. "We are going to take back everything they stole. But to do that, I need to know exactly what David was working on before he died." I looked directly at Jasmine. My brother was a brilliant tech entrepreneur. He was meticulous with his contracts and his assets. He knew how manipulative our parents could be. There is absolutely no way he left a $5 million trust fund completely unprotected and vulnerable to a probate court takeover. He had to have seen this coming. Did he ever mention his financial preparations to you? Did he talk about his estate planning in the weeks leading up to the accident? Jasmine frowned, her brow furrowing as she cast her mind back to those painful final days with her husband. The room grew dead silent as she searched her memory for the missing piece of the puzzle. Jasmine closed her eyes, pressing her fingertips against her temples. The silence in the cramped apartment was broken only by the weak rattling of the old radiator. When she finally opened her eyes, a new emotion flickered within them. It was a cold, sharp clarity. "He was furious," Jasmine whispered. 8 days before the crash, David came home looking like he had seen a ghost. He locked himself in his office with financial ledgers for 10 hours. When he came out, he said he caught Richard stealing. My fingers froze over my keyboard. "From the company." Jasmine nodded. Richard convinced David to handle initial investments when the startup launched. David ran an audit that week and found dummy invoices. Richard was routing funds into a phantom consulting firm. They had a screaming match. Richard tried gaslighting him, calling it a temporary loan. David fired him and threatened to call the authorities. I leaned back, my mind racing. Richard's real estate firm was supposedly highly successful. If he was embezzling from his own son to cover bad deals, his entire empire was built on quicksand. The socialite lifestyle was a house of cards. But my focus snapped back to Lily. "What about the trust fund?" I asked. The $5 million was already established. If David knew Richard was a thief, he would have revoked their access. "He did," Jasmine said, her eyes locking right onto mine. "He told me that night he was restructuring everything. He called his private wealth attorney the next morning. I remember standing in the kitchen holding Lily. David walked in, kissed her head, and looked at me with absolute certainty. He said, 'My parents will never touch a dime of Lily money. I have built a firewall.'" A firewall. The word struck my forensic accountant brain like lightning. David was a tech genius. When a software engineer says they built a firewall, they mean an impenetrable barrier designed to block unauthorized access and trigger alarms. In legal terms, a firewall meant a specific trigger clause embedded deep within the trust documentation. David had anticipated his parents' greed and laid a trap. "But Richard and Catherine are accessing the money," I said. "Beatrice is flying to Europe. Catherine is buying $10,000 gowns. Richard is driving a new Porsche. They successfully petitioned the probate judge to grant them administrative control over the trust when they stole custody of Lily. They are pulling cash out right now." Jasmine shook her head. "If David built a firewall, how are they getting the money? Did the judge override it?" "A judge cannot override a restrictive covenant in an irrevocable trust without an extensive legal battle," I explained. "The trust is governed by the exact language David drafted. If David specifically excluded them, my parents cannot legally withdraw a single cent for personal use. Unless they are lying to the bank." I whispered, the reality dawning on me. Jasmine leaned over the table. "Lying to the bank? You mean fraud?" "I mean federal wire fraud and embezzlement," I said. "Think about it. My parents are bleeding money. Richard's real estate business is failing. They needed millions to keep up their wealthy facade. When David died, they saw a $5 million pile of cash. But David Firewall stood in their way, so they orchestrated a ruthless legal smear campaign to rip Lily from your arms. Physical custody of Lily was the only way they could convince the bank they had a right to manage her assets." "But how did they get past the firewall?" Jasmine asked, her voice rising with furious indignation. "They forged the expenditure requests," I replied, my blood turning to ice. "They are submitting fake invoices to the trust administrator. They are claiming the withdrawals are for Lily medical care, her private schooling, or her living expenses. Then they are routing that money straight into their own failing bank accounts. That is why they locked her in a closet. They do not care about her well-being. She is literally just a physical prop they need to possess in order to commit financial fraud." Jasmine covered her mouth, a choked gasp escaping her lips. "They are starving my baby while using her name to steal millions. And they are doing it with sloppy arrogance," I said, slamming my fist on the table. "My parents think they are smarter than everyone else. They think because they wear designer clothes, no one will ever dare audit their internal family finances. They think they can bypass a tech genius firewall without leaving a digital footprint. I turned my laptop screen toward Jasmine. I am going to track every single penny they have moved since David died. I will find the fake invoices. I will find the offshore accounts. I will find the exact legal mechanism David put in that trust. They think they outsmarted my brother. They are about to find out what happens when they go to war with a real forensic accountant. I pulled up a blank encrypted spreadsheet. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark, cramped kitchen. This was my battlefield. I told Jasmine to gather up every single piece of mail, every legal notice, and every bank statement she had received since the funeral. As Jasmine rushed to a cardboard box, pulling out crumpled envelopes, I felt a cold, hyper-focused calm settle over my mind. The grief of seeing Lily locked in that freezing room was still burning inside my chest. But I channeled that raw fury into a razor-sharp analytical focus. They had destroyed David Trust, stolen Jasmine Child, and cruelly tortured a helpless 7-year-old girl. I slowly watched the cursor blink. David had left a hidden trap. I just needed to find the map. The silent grind was about to begin, and I would not stop until I handed federal authorities enough evidence to lock Richard and Catherine in a cell for the rest of their natural lives. I vanished. I did not answer Catherine's passive-aggressive voicemails about missing Sunday brunch. I ignored Richard's text messages demanding I return the winter coat I had wrapped Lily in. I went completely dark and plunged headfirst into the silent grind. My downtown office became a high-tech war room. I locked the heavy glass door, pulled down the blinds, and fired up my custom auditing software. 2 massive monitors glowed in the dark, illuminating the towering stacks of financial documents Jasmine had given me. I had a singular mission and endless caffeine. I was going to financially dissect the people who had tortured my niece. Forensic accounting is not just about crunching numbers. It is about hunting ghosts. People who hide money leave digital shadows, and Richard was a creature of pure ego. Ego always leaves a trail. I started by pulling the public tax filings and property deeds linked to his name. Richard loved slapping his signature on everything that made him look wealthy. I fed his social security number, his various business identification numbers, and Catherine's maiden name into my encrypted database. I ran a cross-reference check against state registries in Connecticut, Delaware, and Nevada looking for shell companies. The software hummed, pulling data from restricted municipal archives and federal tax databases. My eyes darted across the screen as rows of raw data began to populate. Richard's main enterprise was Crown Development, a real estate firm he constantly bragged about at charity galas. According to the country club gossip, Crown Development was handling massive commercial projects across the East Coast. According to my screen, Crown Development was a rotting corpse. I leaned closer to the monitor, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled the federal bankruptcy filings from 2 years ago. There it was, in black and white. Chapter 7: Liquidation. Richard had not just lost a few bad deals. He had completely bankrupted his primary company 24 months ago. He had defaulted on massive commercial loans, leaving contractors unpaid and investors furious. The court had ordered the liquidation of his business assets to pay off aggressive creditors. The timeline struck me like a physical blow. This happened a full year before David died. While my parents were throwing lavish dinner parties and lecturing me about financial responsibility, they were secretly drowning in a sea of catastrophic debt. Their entire multi-million-dollar upper-class lifestyle was a hollow, crumbling illusion. I typed, furiously running a deep dive into the $3 million estate where they were currently starving Lily. The property records painted a terrifying picture. The house was mortgaged to the absolute hilt. Richard had taken out a second mortgage, then a third. He had leveraged the property against high-interest predatory loans just to keep the lights on and the facade intact. They were months behind on property taxes. The bank was circling like a shark, preparing to issue a notice of foreclosure. I switched tabs and pulled up Catherine's credit history. The screen flooded with red warning flags. She was running a massive credit card kiting scheme. She was opening new platinum cards to pay the minimum balances on her old cards. The $10,000 designer gowns Beatrice paraded around in were bought on credit. The expensive champagne they drank the night they locked Lily in a freezing closet was purchased with money they did not actually have. They were destitute on paper, living a desperate, breathless lie. This was why they needed custody of Lily so badly. It had absolutely nothing to do with family or love or carrying on David's legacy. They were staring down the barrel of total financial ruin. They were going to lose the mansion, the cars, the country club memberships, and their precious social status. They were going to be exposed as frauds to the entire Connecticut elite. Then David died. The tragedy was their golden ticket. They looked at a grieving African-American widow and saw an easy target. They looked at a traumatized 7-year-old girl and saw a $5 million lifeline. They orchestrated a ruthless legal smear campaign to strip Jasmine of her parental rights, not because she was unfit, but because she stood between them and the cash they desperately needed to avoid homelessness. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracking the money flow from the moment the corrupt judge granted them emergency guardianship. I needed to see exactly how they were bypassing the firewall David had built. I accessed the probate court public logs and cross-referenced them with the trust administrator filings. Jasmine had handed me a crucial piece of paper, an annual summary statement from the trust that she had received right before her custody was fully terminated. I ran the numbers through my auditing program. The pacing of my heartbeat accelerated as the algorithm highlighted a series of highly suspicious outbound wire transfers. The trust was designed to disperse funds strictly for Lily's direct benefit, healthcare, education, and basic living expenses. Yet the outgoing cash flow was staggering. $50,000 withdrawn for alleged medical specialty care. $30,000 categorized as advanced private tutoring. Another $40,000 labeled as home environment optimization to suit the child's trauma recovery needs. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Home environment optimization. They had taken $40,000 from an orphaned child's trust fund and labeled it as trauma recovery. I remembered the freezing dark closet. I remembered the padlock drilled directly into the refrigerator doors. I remembered Lily shivering violently in my winter coat, terrified to make a sound. They were not spending a single cent of that money on her. They were generating fake invoices. They were submitting fraudulent expenditure requests to the trust administrator, claiming Lily required massive financial support. The administrator, seeing the court, ordered guardianship papers and the fake medical bills signed off on the transfers. The money was being routed from the trust directly into a shell company Richard had registered in Delaware. From there, it was quietly funneled into his personal checking account to pay the mortgages and the credit card debt. They were stealing her future to fund their fake present. They were actively starving her while claiming exorbitant grocery and care expenses to the bank. It was federal wire fraud. It was criminal embezzlement of the highest order. And I finally had the digital paper trail to prove it. I leaned back in my office chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. The silent grind had yielded the exact ammunition I needed. Richard and Catherine thought they were criminal masterminds. They thought their pristine reputation would shield them from scrutiny. They had no idea they had just handed a seasoned forensic accountant the very rope needed to hang them. I picked up my phone and dialed Jasmine's number. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, casting a sharp, bright light across my desk. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxious exhaustion. "Jasmine," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. "I found it. I found the bankruptcy. I found the fraud. I found everything. Tell your boss at the diner you are quitting. We are going to war." I hung up the phone and immediately dove back into the digital labyrinth. Finding the shell company was just the first breach in their armor. Now I needed to map the entire blast radius. I opened a new tracking matrix and began isolating every single withdrawal authorized by the trust administrator over the past 11 months. The sheer audacity of their theft was staggering. Richard and Catherine were not just skimming off the top. They were treating David's life insurance and hard-earned tech fortune like a personal ATM. I isolated a cluster of transactions categorized under administrative guardianship fees. The legal limit for these types of reimbursements was strictly regulated, but my father had submitted heavily redacted invoices from a fake legal consulting firm he had hastily registered. He was paying himself a massive salary just for the privilege of housing his granddaughter. But the money did not stay in his business account. I followed the digital thread as it wove through a network of shell companies before depositing directly into their personal spending accounts. The exact purchases materialized on my screen, painting a portrait of absolute moral bankruptcy. On November 4th, an outbound wire transfer of $45,000 cleared the trust, explicitly labeled as a therapeutic behavioral intervention program for Lily. I cross-referenced the date and the recipient routing number. The money went straight to a luxury travel concierge in Manhattan. It paid for Beatrice's first-class flights to Milan, a 2-week stay at a 5-star boutique hotel, and a private shopping guide. They had literally stolen a grieving child therapy fund to buy my unemployed 30-year-old sister Italian leather handbags. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I kept digging, refusing to take a break. In early December, a $12,000 withdrawal was approved under the guise of an emergency private school tuition deposit. I tracked the destination. It fed directly into the accounting department of the Oak Ridge Country Club. Catherine had used her orphaned granddaughter education fund to renew her elite platinum membership and cover her outstanding social tab. Then came the largest single transaction. $80,000 pulled in mid-January, flagged as an accessible transportation upgrade to accommodate the minor. I clicked the corresponding digital invoice. It led directly to a high-end European auto dealership in downtown Chicago. Richard had bought himself a brand-new Porsche Cayenne. He was driving around town in a luxury sports car funded by the blood money of his dead son, while the actual beneficiary was locked in an unheated closet eating cold canned soup. They were entirely funding the golden child luxury lifestyle and their own aristocratic illusions on the back of a 7-year-old girl. They were actively bleeding a dead man legacy dry. Every single transaction was a severe federal crime, carrying decades of prison time. I downloaded the entire ledger, exporting the encrypted files onto 3 separate physical hard drives to ensure nothing could ever be deleted. The paper trail was flawless. Now I just needed them to walk right into my trap. The opportunity presented itself exactly 3 weeks later. I was sitting at my office desk reviewing the final compiled ledgers when my phone vibrated across the glass surface. The caller ID flashed with Catherine's name. I let it ring 4 times, allowing the tension to build before tapping the screen and bringing the receiver to my ear. I did not even have the chance to say hello before the theatrical performance began. "Naomi," Catherine wailed into the receiver, her voice hitching with loud, exaggerated sobs. "You have to help us. It is a catastrophe. It is an absolute nightmare." I pressed the record button on my secondary desk phone. "What is wrong?" I asked, keeping my tone entirely neutral. "It is Lily," Catherine cried, her breath catching in a way that sounded entirely rehearsed. "We just got back from a specialist in Boston. They ran emergency scans. Naomi, she is incredibly sick. The doctor said she has a rare aggressive form of spinal degeneration. Her vertebrae are failing. If we do not operate immediately, she could be paralyzed for the rest of her life." I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer monitor. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Catherine was using a fabricated terminal illness to elicit panic. I squeezed my eyes shut, marveling at the depths of their depravity. "Spinal degeneration," I repeated, injecting a heavy dose of fake trembling into my voice. "Oh my God. What do the doctors need to do?" "There is an experimental surgical procedure," Catherine explained, sniffing loudly into the microphone. "It is highly specialized and completely out of network. The hospital requires an upfront deposit to book the surgical suite and fly in the pediatric surgeon from Europe. They need $100,000 by the end of the week, or they will give the slot to another child." I remained silent for a long moment, letting her stew in the manufactured tension. "If this was an emergency, why not use the trust fund?" I asked softly, playing the part of the confused but concerned aunt. "David left $5 million specifically for her medical care. Catherine let out a sharp, frustrated sigh, quickly masking it with another fake sob. We tried, Naomi. We tried everything. But the probate judge put a temporary freeze on large medical disbursements while they audit the quarterly taxes. The bureaucratic red tape could take months to clear, and Lily simply does not have months. Her spine is deteriorating as we speak. You have to step up, Naomi. We have drained our own liquid savings trying to keep her comfortable. You are her aunt. You have that expensive downtown condo. You need to take out a second mortgage immediately. We need that cash. I muted my phone for exactly 3 seconds. I needed to ensure I did not laugh out loud. My parents were not just content with bleeding my dead brother dry. They were now actively trying to bankrupt me. They saw my property and my stable income as untapped resources. They figured they could use my love for my niece to manipulate me into signing away my own financial security. If I took out a second mortgage to hand them $100,000, they would funnel it straight into Richard's failing shell companies to pay off another ballooning loan. They would leave me drowning in debt while they sipped champagne. What Catherine did not know was that I had already anticipated a medical scam. 2 days prior, Jasmine and I had legally obtained Lily's recent medical records through our newly hired bulldog attorney. The documents showed a standard pediatric physical required by her school district. The doctor had noted that Lily was slightly underweight and anxious, but her spine was perfectly healthy. She did not have a rare degenerative disease. She was a physically healthy 7-year-old girl being held captive by financial predators. I unmuted the phone and forced my voice to crack. $100,000 is a massive amount of money, Catherine. I would have to leverage everything I own. The bank would need to appraise my home. It could ruin me. Would you really put a price tag on your own flesh and blood? Catherine snapped, dropping the grieving grandmother act for a fraction of a second. Your brother would be disgusted by your hesitation. We are doing everything we can to save her life. If you refuse to help us, you will be entirely responsible when she ends up in a wheelchair. Do you want that on your conscience, Naomi? Do you want to be the reason David's only child loses her ability to walk? The psychological manipulation was a masterclass in toxic abuse. She was weaponizing guilt and shame, packaging it as familial duty. I took a ragged breath, perfectly executing the role of the broken, desperate family member yielding to their demands. Okay, I whispered, sounding thoroughly defeated. Okay, I will do it. I will call my bank right now and start the paperwork for the second mortgage. I can probably secure the cash by Friday. The immediate shift in Catherine's tone was nauseating. The hysterical sobbing vanished instantly. Her voice became brisk, efficient, and terrifyingly cold. I knew you would do the right thing, Naomi. Blood is thicker than water after all. We will need you to transfer the funds directly into Richard's private holding account so he can wire it to the surgical team in Boston. We cannot risk any delays with third-party bank holds. Of course, I agreed meekly. But I need to see the medical documentation for the bank loan. And I need to see Lily. I want to look her in the eyes and tell her everything is going to be okay. Catherine hesitated, clearly annoyed by the condition but unwilling to risk losing the $100,000 payout. Fine. Come to the estate tomorrow evening at 7 sharp. Richard will have the preliminary hospital invoices ready for you to review. Do not be late, Naomi. We are operating on a very strict timeline here. The line went dead. I slowly placed the receiver back onto the base of the phone. The trap was officially set. They had invited the forensic accountant straight into the heart of their fraudulent empire, thinking I was just a naive piggy bank ready to be slaughtered. They wanted me to walk into their mansion and sign away my life savings. I pulled out a fresh notepad and wrote down tomorrow's date. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to walk through those heavy mahogany doors and sit in their lavish living room. But I was not bringing a checkbook. I was bringing the first phase of their absolute destruction. The next evening at exactly 7 o'clock, I pulled my car through the heavy wrought iron gates of my parents' estate. The massive brick colonial house loomed ahead, completely illuminated against the dark winter sky. I parked on the freshly plowed driveway and took a deep, steadying breath. I had to completely suppress the forensic accountant inside me and channel the terrified, gullible aunt they expected to walk through their doors. Sitting in the passenger seat next to me was a massive premium plush teddy bear. It was nearly 3 feet tall with incredibly soft brown fur and large glossy black eyes. It looked like the ultimate comforting gift for a sick child. It was actually a highly sophisticated piece of surveillance technology. Earlier that morning, I had visited a private security contractor I occasionally used for corporate espionage audits. I paid him to surgically install a high-definition motion-activated Wi-Fi-enabled camera directly behind the left eye of the bear. The lens was entirely invisible to the naked eye, blending perfectly with the dark plastic. The device ran on a high-capacity lithium battery designed to last for weeks, and it automatically connected to a hidden cellular hotspot zipped inside the stuffing. Every single frame of audio and video it captured would be instantly uploaded to a secure encrypted cloud server that Jasmine was currently monitoring from her apartment. I grabbed the heavy bear and walked up the front steps. I practiced my facial expression, pulling my features into a mask of pure, exhausted anxiety. I rang the bell and hunched my shoulders, making myself appear as small and defeated as possible. The heavy door swung open, revealing Catherine. She wore a dark cashmere sweater and perfectly applied makeup, holding a damp tissue in her hand to signify a mother in distress. Naomi. She sighed, ushering me inside with a dramatic wave. Thank you for coming quickly. The situation is just so overwhelming. I stepped into the grand foyer, clutching the giant teddy bear tightly against my chest. How is she? I asked, my voice trembling perfectly on cue. Is she in pain? Catherine shook her head, wiping her dry eyes with the tissue. She is resting in her room. The medication the doctors prescribed makes her very drowsy. She cannot have visitors right now. We must keep her environment completely sterile and stress-free until the surgery. It was a convenient lie to keep me away from Lily, but it played perfectly into my strategy. I followed Catherine into the sprawling, open-concept living room. Richard sat in a leather armchair reviewing a stack of forged medical invoices. Beatrice was sprawled across the velvet sofa, scrolling through her phone and looking entirely unbothered by her niece's supposed terminal spinal condition. You brought a toy, Richard noted, looking up from his papers with a distinct scowl. That is highly impractical, Naomi. We need liquid capital, not stuffed animals. I know, I said, shrinking back and lowering my gaze to the floor. I just wanted to bring her something to look at. Something to keep her spirits up while she recovers. Since she cannot have visitors, I thought I could put it up there on the mantel. That way she can see it when she finally comes out to the living room. I did not wait for their permission. I walked purposefully toward the massive custom oak shelving unit that separated the grand living room from the sprawling gourmet kitchen. The architectural layout of the house was heavily open plan. Placing the bear on the top shelf provided an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire central living area, the dining table and the refrigerator they had previously padlocked. I lifted the bear and positioned it perfectly. I nudged the left shoulder slightly forward, ensuring the hidden lens had a sweeping vantage point of the entire space. I fluffed the fur around the glossy black eye and stepped back, admiring my work. The Trojan horse was officially inside the fortress walls. Beatrice snorted without looking up from her phone screen. That thing is hideous. It clashes completely with the interior decor. Leave it, Catherine dismissed, waving her hand impatiently. It does not matter right now. What matters is the bank transfer. Sit down, Naomi. I took a seat on the edge of a stiff armchair, keeping my hands clasped nervously in my lap. Richard pushed a folder across the mahogany coffee table. Inside were 3 pages of highly sophisticated fake medical bills, complete with stolen hospital logos and fabricated billing codes. To an untrained eye, they looked terrifyingly real. To a forensic accountant, they were glaringly fraudulent. The surgical team requires the $100,000 wired directly to my holding account by tomorrow afternoon, Richard stated, tapping the folder. They will not reserve the operating theater without the deposit. Have you initiated the second mortgage? I swallowed hard, squeezing my eyes shut to feign panic. I went to the bank this morning, Richard. I started the underwriting process, but there is a problem. Richard went entirely rigid. His face darkened and he leaned forward, gripping the armrests of his chair. "What do you mean there is a problem? You promised the funds." "I am getting the funds," I stammered quickly, raising my hands in defense. But the bank compliance officer said federal regulations require a mandatory property appraisal for any secondary mortgage exceeding $50,000. They cannot bypass the federal law. "The appraiser is coming to my condo tomorrow morning. The loan officer guaranteed me that the cash will be fully cleared and ready to wire by Friday afternoon." "Friday?" Catherine shrieked, dropping her tissue. "That is completely unacceptable, Naomi. We told you the doctors need the money immediately. I cannot force the federal banking system to skip an appraisal, Catherine." I pleaded, sounding on the verge of tears. I begged them to expedite it. "Friday is the absolute fastest they can release $100,000 in liquid cash. I swear I am doing everything I can to save her." Richard rubbed his temples, letting out a sharp, furious breath. He exchanged a panicked look with Catherine. I knew exactly what that look meant. They had creditors breathing down their necks, and their shell companies were running on fumes. They needed that cash injection desperately. "Fine," Richard snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "Friday afternoon. Not a minute later, Naomi. I will stall the surgical coordinators and tell them the wire is clearing international security protocols. But if you fail to deliver that money by Friday, you will be signing Lily death warrant. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I whispered, nodding frantically. "I will have the money Friday, I promise." I stood up, keeping my posture submissive and defeated. I cast one final worried glance toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms, playing the part of the helpless aunt until the very end. "Just keep her safe until Friday," I said, my voice cracking. "Get out and secure the funds," Richard growled, pointing toward the front door. I turned and walked out of the estate, stepping back into the freezing night air. The moment the heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind me, my fearful expression vanished entirely. A sharp, genuine smile spread across my face. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and opened the encrypted surveillance application. The screen immediately lit up with a crystal-clear, high-definition live feed of my parents' living room. The audio was pristine, capturing Beatrice complaining about how annoying my visit was. The trap was armed and active. Now all I had to do was wait for them to incriminate themselves. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car with the engine idling in the freezing driveway, I pulled up the hidden voice memo application on my phone. The live video feed from the plush bear was running flawlessly, but I needed to secure the primary audio file I had captured during our face-to-face interaction. Before I even rang their doorbell, I had pressed record. I tapped the screen, and the crystal-clear playback filled the cold interior of my vehicle, transporting me back into their lavish living room just 10 minutes prior. I had to verify that the verbal trap I set had snapped shut exactly as planned. The audio began with the rustling of my own coat, followed by the sharp, arrogant tone of my father demanding the bank transfer. Then my own voice trembled through the speakers, perfectly executing the role of the terrified, gullible aunt. "Richard, I understand the urgency of the spinal surgery," I heard myself say on the recording. But the bank compliance officer was extremely specific. "If I am pulling $100,000 against my home equity for a medical emergency, they need the exact billing codes from the Boston hospital. Can you just show me the itemized invoice so I can copy the facility identification numbers?" The recording captured the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. I had cornered him. A fake invoice generated on a home computer would not have verified federal medical billing codes. I heard Richard shuffle the fraudulent papers on his desk, coughing nervously to buy time. "The hospital administration has not generated the final codes because the surgery is experimental," he lied smoothly. "They operate outside standard insurance parameters, Naomi. That is why we need raw cash." I pushed the bait slightly closer. "But $100,000 is a massive wire transfer," I pleaded on the recording. "I just want to ensure that every single penny goes directly to the surgical suite and Lily recovery. I need to know the money is actually going to save her spine." That was when Beatrice took the bait. The recording picked up the sharp, obnoxious sound of my 30-year-old sister scoffing from the velvet sofa. "You are such an unbelievable idiot, Naomi. she sneered, her voice dripping with venomous superiority. "You have always been completely clueless about how the real world works. The hospital does not need your stupid billing codes for a private cash deposit. They just need the wire to clear so we can finally breathe and fix the summer house." My heart hammered against my ribs as I listened to the playback. There it was. The golden child had been too arrogant and too impatient to stick to the script. "Fix the summer house," I heard my recorded voice ask, projecting innocent confusion. I thought this was for the pediatric specialist. Beatrice let out a loud, exasperated groan. "It covers everything we need," she bragged openly, entirely careless with her words. "Once your incredibly slow bank finally clears that cash, we are gutting the Hamptons property. That outdated granite in the kitchen is an absolute nightmare, and the deck needs a total overhaul before the season starts. We have been putting it off for months because of David probate mess. Your money is going to solve all our problems. So stop asking annoying questions and just sign the mortgage papers." "Beatrice, shut your mouth," Catherine hissed sharply in the background, realizing instantly that her favorite daughter had just confessed to massive financial fraud. "She is just exhausted from the stress of caring for a sick child, Naomi. Do not listen to her rambling. She does not know what she is talking about. The money is strictly for the Boston surgical team." "I know, Mother," I replied on the recording, sounding thoroughly submissive. "I will get the funds by Friday. I promise." The audio ended with the sound of the heavy mahogany doors closing behind me. I stopped the playback and let out a long, shaky breath. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had swallowed a tidal wave of rage in that living room. Listening to my sister openly brag about stealing $100,000 from me to fund a luxury kitchen remodel, while my orphaned niece was locked in an unheated closet upstairs, took every ounce of physical restraint I possessed. I had wanted to lunge across the coffee table and tear the designer clothes right off her back. I had wanted to scream until my lungs bled. But I played the gullible daughter perfectly. I lowered my eyes, trembled on command, and walked out the door, leaving them with the absolute certainty that they had won. They thought I was a spineless pushover. They thought my love for Lily made me blind to their deception. Instead, I had just legally captured a recorded confession of attempted wire fraud and extortion. I forwarded the encrypted audio file directly to a secure server I shared with Jasmine. Within seconds, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message from my sister-in-law. It read simply, "We have them." I switched my phone display back to the live surveillance feed, broadcasting from the plush bear I had left on their shelf. The high-definition camera captured the entire main living area in stunning clarity. The audio pickup was highly sensitive, catching every word spoken in the room. I watched the screen intently. Richard was pouring 2 large glasses of expensive bourbon, handing one to Catherine. He leaned back in his leather chair, a victorious smirk plastered across his face. "I told you she would cave," Richard boasted, taking a deep swallow of his drink. "She has always been overly emotional. Throw a fake terminal illness at her and she instantly empties her bank account." Catherine took a sip of her bourbon, smiling coldly. "It is about time she contributed to this family. That 100,000 will cover the outstanding property taxes and give us enough liquid cash to secure the Hamptons contractors. We will just tell her the experimental surgery failed to correct the spinal issue and Lily needs long-term bed rest. She will be too devastated to ask for the money back." Beatrice tossed her phone onto the sofa, stretching her arms above her head. "Can we please get the kitchen cabinets in matte black?" she demanded. "I saw a design in Architectural Digest that looked incredibly chic. And you need to hire a nanny. I am completely sick of dealing with that crying brat." Richard nodded smoothly, pointing his glass at Beatrice. "The moment Naomi wire clears on Friday, we will hire a full-time au pair. You will not have to look at the kid again, Beatrice. We just need to keep her hidden upstairs until the probate judge officially signs over the remainder of David Trust Fund." I sat in the freezing car, my breath pluming in the cold air, as I watched them plot their crimes in high-definition video. They were celebrating their perceived victory, completely unaware that a digital spy was transmitting their entire conspiracy directly to a forensic accountant. Every stolen dollar they discussed, every cruel plan they mapped out, every piece of fraudulent activity they celebrated was being logged, time-stamped, and securely vaulted. I put my car in gear and slowly drove down their long, winding driveway. The storm had finally passed, leaving the wealthy Connecticut suburb blanketed in pristine white snow. The neighborhood looked peaceful and perfect, completely hiding the monsters that lived behind its gates. I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city. The ammunition was fully gathered. The audio recording proved their extortion. The video feed proved their intent to embezzle. The financial ledgers proved their bankruptcy. I had built a watertight case that no dirty lawyer could ever dismantle. The silent grind was over. Now it was time to build the guillotine. The next 48 hours blurred into a sleepless marathon of digital surveillance. Jasmine and I transformed my secure downtown office into a command center. We sat side by side at my massive glass desk, bathed in the harsh blue glow of the monitors. The live feed from the plush bear broadcasted directly to my primary screen, delivering a high-definition window straight into the heart of my parents' estate. We ordered takeout, we barely touched, and drank black coffee until our hands shook. We were hunters waiting patiently in the digital brush. It happened on Tuesday afternoon. The sprawling living room was quiet. Richard was out, likely dodging creditors, and Catherine was at a spa appointment. Beatrice was supposedly in charge of watching her sick niece. The hidden camera caught the heavy oak door of the hallway cracking open. Lily stepped out. She looked entirely diminished, her small frame swallowed by an oversized gray sweater that clearly belonged to someone else. She crept toward the kitchen island, moving with a heartbreaking, silent stealth that only abused children learn. She reached up and grabbed a single slice of dry toast left abandoned on a cutting board. Before she could even take a bite, Beatrice stormed into the frame. She was wearing silk pajamas and holding a glittering nail file. She lunged forward and violently snatched the bread directly out of Lily's hands. The sudden aggression made Lily stumble backward, hitting her shoulder against the marble counter. "What do you think you are doing?" Beatrice shrieked, pointing the sharp end of the nail file at the terrified 7-year-old. "That is artisanal sourdough. It costs $14 a loaf. You do not get to just sneak around and steal food like a street rat. If you are hungry, you can eat the stale crackers in the pantry. Now get back upstairs before you ruin my mood. I am waiting for an important call from a personal shopper." Jasmine let out a strangled cry next to me. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a sob as she watched her daughter curl inward and silently scurry back toward the dark hallway. I grabbed Jasmine's shoulder, squeezing it tightly to keep her grounded. My own heart was pounding with a violent, homicidal rage. I wanted to drive back to Connecticut and drag my sister out of that house by her hair. But I kept my eyes locked on the screen and my fingers flying across the keyboard. I highlighted the timestamp, logged the exact coordinates of the video file, and hit download. The evidence was secured. The most damning piece of ammunition arrived the following evening. Richard and Catherine were hosting a private dinner party in the formal dining room just out of the camera line of sight. We could hear the clinking of crystal glasses and the obnoxious laughter of their wealthy guests. Lily had been strictly ordered to stay hidden in the guest wing. But around 9 o'clock, the camera captured her wandering back into the living room. She was clutching her stomach, her face pale and streaked with fresh tears. Catherine walked into the frame holding an empty silver wine bucket. When she spotted Lily standing near the sofa, her fake high society smile instantly dissolved into a mask of pure venom. She slammed the silver bucket onto the coffee table. "Why are you out here?" Catherine hissed. Her voice kept low to avoid alerting her guests. "I told you to stay out of sight. My friends do not want to look at a miserable, sniveling child while they eat their scallops." Lily trembled, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "I want my mom," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure grief. "I want my mom to come get me. I do not want to be here anymore." Catherine stepped forward, towering over the small girl. She grabbed Lily by the upper arm, squeezing tight enough to make the child wince. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat!" Catherine spat, her voice dripping with absolute malice. "Your mother is a broke, pathetic loser who does not want you. You are lucky we even allow you to sleep under this roof. If it were not for your trust fund keeping a roof over our heads, I would have thrown you in an orphanage the day your father died. You are nothing but a meal ticket to us. Now get back in that room and lock the door before I give them a reason to cancel the surgery." Catherine shoved her backward. Lily stumbled, catching herself on the arm of the sofa before running desperately out of the frame. Catherine smoothed her designer dress, picked up the wine bucket, and pasted her fake glowing smile back onto her face before walking back toward the dining room. In my office, the silence was deafening. Jasmine was weeping openly, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the horrifying reality of what her daughter was enduring. The sheer psychological torture inflicted by my mother was beyond anything I had ever anticipated. Catherine had not just admitted to hating the child. She had explicitly confessed on high-definition audio and video that Lily was nothing more than a financial hostage. She had verbally confirmed that the only reason they fought for custody was to drain David Trust Fund to save their own bankrupt estate. I did not shed a single tear. My grief had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, sterile machine built for total destruction. I immediately began processing the captured media. I isolated the video files, stripping away any background noise to ensure Catherine and Beatrice's voices were perfectly clear. I encrypted the raw data using military-grade software, locking it behind dual authentication passwords. I was not going to rely on a single local hard drive. I uploaded the encrypted files to 3 separate secure cloud servers routed through offshore proxy networks. I created physical backups on 2 flash drives, handing one directly to Jasmine. I then generated a master dossier, integrating the video evidence with the fraudulent financial ledgers, the fake medical invoices, and the bankruptcy filings. The digital paper trail was now reinforced by undeniable visual proof of severe child abuse and extortion. My parents had wrapped themselves in an illusion of aristocratic benevolence. They had bought off a judge, hired expensive corporate sharks, and weaponized the legal system to steal a child. But they had fundamentally misunderstood the modern world. Wealth could buy a lot of things, but it could not erase a time-stamped high-definition video recording stored on a decentralized server. I closed the surveillance application and shut down the primary monitor. The room plunged into darkness save for the city lights filtering through the blinds. I looked at Jasmine. She was clutching the flash drive to her chest, her jaw set with a fierce maternal determination. The weeping was over. "We have everything," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet office. "The financial fraud, the extortion, the abuse. It is all logged and secured." Jasmine stood up, wiping her face. "What is our next move?" I grabbed my heavy winter coat and my briefcase. "Tomorrow morning, we stop playing defense. We are going to find the most ruthless family law attorney in this state, and we are going to drop a nuclear bomb on their entire operation." The sun had barely crept above the Chicago skyline when I logged into my primary brokerage account. I did not hesitate. With a few decisive keystrokes, I liquidated my entire stock portfolio. I sold my blue-chip shares, my aggressive growth funds, and my carefully curated tech investments. Within 60 seconds, I had converted 7 years of meticulous financial planning into raw, liquid capital. Wars are not fought with good intentions. They are fought with brutal, overwhelming resources, and I needed a mercenary. By 9 o'clock that morning, Jasmine and I were sitting in the reception area of the most feared family law firm in the state. I had done my research. I needed an attorney who did not care about my parents' country club status or their fabricated charity galas. I needed a shark who thrived on blood in the water. That led us directly to Brenda Carmichael. Brenda was a former federal prosecutor who had pivoted to family law. She had a reputation for ripping apart corrupt, wealthy dynasties and leaving arrogant patriarchs sobbing on the witness stand. A paralegal ushered us into a massive glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. Brenda walked in a moment later, holding a cup of black coffee. She wore a sharp, tailored suit and possessed a piercing, calculating gaze that immediately put Jasmine on edge. I did not flinch. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a certified cashier's check for $50,000, and slid it across the polished mahogany table. "That is your retainer," I stated, my voice perfectly level. "I need you to completely dismantle a fraudulent emergency guardianship and secure full, irrevocable custody for my sister-in-law." Brenda did not even look at the check. She looked at Jasmine, and then at me. "I know who your father is, Naomi," she said, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "Richard is represented by Harrison Thorne. Thorne is notoriously dirty. He specializes in burying his opponents in frivolous injunctions and bleeding them dry with legal fees. He already convinced a judge that Jasmine is an unfit mother. Reversing an established federal guardianship requires an act of God or a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Thorne will drag you through the mud. He will use your brother's death, Jasmine income, and every systemic racial bias in the book to destroy you both in open court. Are you prepared for that kind of bloodbath?" Jasmine swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "I will do whatever it takes to get my daughter back," she whispered fiercely. "I do not care what they say about me. I just want Lily safe." Brenda sighed, setting her coffee down. "Passion is great, Jasmine, but it does not win cases against billionaires. Thorne will argue that removing Lily from a $3 million estate to live in a one-bedroom apartment is detrimental to her well-being. He will present fake medical bills claiming Lily requires expensive care that only Richard can provide. They will fight back with everything they have. They will fight dirty, and they will fight to destroy you." I let a slow, cold smirk spread across my face. I reached down and lifted my heavy leather briefcase, setting it squarely on the glass table. I popped the brass latches. The sharp click echoed in the quiet room. "My father is not a billionaire, Brenda," I said, pulling out the first stack of printed ledgers and spreading them across the table. "He is not even a millionaire. He is a bankrupt fraud, drowning in predatory loans and using an orphaned 7-year-old girl as a human shield against his creditors." Brenda raised an eyebrow, her professional skepticism cracking slightly. She picked up the first financial summary. I laid out the USB drives next to the paperwork. "Harrison Thorne can bring all the dirty legal tactics he wants." I continued, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp cadence. "He can argue about the size of their estate, but he cannot argue with federal wire fraud. Inside this briefcase is a complete forensic audit of my parents' entire financial network. I have documented every single offshore shell company, every fraudulent invoice, and every penny they have embezzled from my late brother, $5 million trust fund. They are literally stealing Lily medical and education money to pay off their luxury cars and country club fees." Brenda's eyes darted across the ledgers. The color drained from her face as her experienced legal mind processed the sheer magnitude of the crimes documented on the pages before her. She picked up a second file, flipping through the cross-referenced bank statements and the fake therapy receipts used to fund my sister trip to Milan. "It gets worse," I said, tapping the encrypted flash drive. "They recently tried to extort $100,000 from me by claiming Lily has a terminal spinal condition. I placed a hidden surveillance camera inside their living room to capture the transaction. What I actually captured is high-definition video and audio of my mother and sister physically and verbally abusing Lily. They admit on tape that they are only keeping her for the trust fund money. They are starving her, Brenda. They padlocked the refrigerator." Brenda dropped the paperwork onto the table. She stared at me, her silence speaking volumes. The predatory prosecutor inside her had just woken up. She looked at the cashier's check and then slowly pushed it back across the table toward me. "I am not taking your $50,000, Naomi," Brenda said, a dangerous predatory smile slowly forming on her lips. "I am going to take my fees directly from Richard asset liquidation after we seize his accounts. This is no longer just a custody dispute. This is a massive criminal conspiracy." Jasmine let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth as a wave of profound relief washed over her exhausted features. "Here is the master plan," Brenda announced, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the glass table. "We do not give them any warning. If we send a standard legal notice, Thorne will immediately advise Richard to destroy financial records and hide the child. We are going to file an emergency ex parte motion for an immediate change of custody based on severe and present danger to the minor. We bypass the standard scheduling and force an immediate hearing. Will the judge grant an emergency hearing? Jasmine asked, her voice tight with anxious hope. Brenda tapped the flash drive. With this kind of evidence, a judge will clear the docket. We are going to blindside them. They will walk into that courtroom thinking it is a standard status hearing. They will expect to bully a broke widow and an estranged daughter. They will have no idea they are walking into a federal trap. I leaned back in my chair, matching Brenda's dangerous smile. I want them to feel exactly what they made Jasmine feel, I stated coldly. I want them to stand in front of a judge and watch their entire fake aristocratic empire burn to ash. I want Richard and Catherine to realize they are leaving that courthouse in handcuffs. Brenda opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard to begin drafting the emergency injunction. "Let us go to war," she declared. The war room buzzed with electric, frantic energy for the rest of the day. We meticulously categorized every fake invoice, matching it to the corresponding video footage. We built an impenetrable timeline of their abuse and extortion. By sunset, the legal trap was fully constructed. My parents had spent the last year thinking they were the apex predators of our family. They were about to discover what happens when the prey is a forensic accountant with nothing left to lose. 72 hours later, the heavy brass doors of the federal family courthouse stood before us. The morning air was bitterly cold, but the sky was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. I walked beside Jasmine up the wide concrete steps. She wore a simple, modest navy dress, her posture rigid with a mixture of terror and fierce maternal determination. She clutched her modest leather purse as if it were a shield. Inside that purse was a printed photograph of Lily, a tangible reminder of exactly what we were fighting to reclaim today. I walked one step behind her, carrying my battered leather briefcase. My expression was an unreadable mask of solid ice. I wore a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, my hair pulled back severely. I was not here as a grieving aunt or a submissive daughter. I was here as the executioner. We passed through the metal detectors and rode the crowded elevator to the 4th floor. The corridor outside courtroom 4B was eerily quiet until the elevator chimed again. The doors slid open and the circus arrived. Richard, Catherine, and Beatrice stepped out, looking like they were attending a high society gala rather than a custody hearing regarding an abused child. Catherine wore a pristine white Chanel blazer with matching slacks, a heavy diamond brooch pinned near her collar. She looked the picture of aristocratic grace. Richard strode beside her in a custom Italian navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, radiating the arrogant confidence of a man who believed his wealth made him a god. Beatrice trailed behind them, scrolling mindlessly on her phone, wearing an oversized designer trench coat and oversized sunglasses indoors, as if the fluorescent courthouse lighting offended her delicate sensibilities. Flanking them was their legal team led by Harrison Thorne. Thorne was a tall, imposing man with a reputation for absolute ruthlessness. He wore a pinstripe suit and carried a sleek, monogrammed briefcase. He moved with the predatory swagger of a lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour and had never lost a case to a public defender. He leaned over, whispering something to Richard. My father threw his head back and laughed, a booming, obnoxious sound that echoed down the quiet hallway. It was a calculated display of dominance designed to intimidate Jasmine before we even stepped foot inside the courtroom. Catherine spotted us standing near the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. Her fake smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of utter disgust. She linked her arm through Richard's arm and steered their entourage directly toward us. They stopped just a few feet away, invading our personal space. "I cannot believe you actually showed up, Jasmine," Catherine sneered, looking my sister-in-law up and down with blatant racial and class contempt. "I thought you would have given up by now. You are just wasting the court time and embarrassing yourself. You cannot afford this fight." Jasmine lifted her chin, refusing to break eye contact. "I am here for my daughter Catherine." Richard scoffed, checking his heavy gold Rolex. "You mean our ward? We are here to update the judge on her excellent progress in our care." Thorne assures me we can have your visitation rights permanently revoked today. You are unstable, Jasmine. You live in a slum. We are protecting David's legacy from your incompetence. He then turned his cold gaze to me. And you, Naomi. I am shocked you have the audacity to show your face after barging into my home. You should be groveling for forgiveness, not standing with this pathetic woman. I stared back at him completely deadpan. My heart did not race. My palms did not sweat. I felt absolutely nothing but clinical detachment. The audit is complete, Richard. I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I am just here to submit my final report. He frowned, clearly confused by my calm demeanor. Before he could issue another threat, the bailiff opened the heavy wooden doors and announced that Judge Mitchell was ready to hear the docket. We filed into the courtroom. The space was intimidating, lined with dark oak paneling and heavy leather chairs. Jasmine walked to the petitioner table, taking a seat next to Brenda Carmichael. Brenda looked perfectly relaxed, arranging her legal pads with methodical precision. She did not even glance at Harrison Thorne when he aggressively dropped his massive stack of files onto the respondent table across the aisle. Richard, Catherine, and Beatrice took their seats right behind Thorne, whispering and smiling as if they were settling in to watch a highly entertaining theatrical performance. I walked to the gallery, taking a seat in the second row directly behind Jasmine. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on my lap, resting my hands flat against the cool leather. I kept my eyes locked on the back of my father's head, watching the arrogant tilt of his neck. They were so incredibly confident. They truly believed they had orchestrated a flawless victory. They believed their money, their influence, and their expensive lawyers had built an impenetrable fortress around their crimes. They had absolutely no idea that I held the detonator to their entire existence right here in my lap. The side door opened, and Judge Mitchell entered the courtroom. He was an older, stern-faced man, known for his zero-tolerance policy regarding courtroom theatrics. Everyone stood as he took his seat at the elevated bench overlooking the room. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the thick file sitting in front of him. We are here for an emergency ex parte motion regarding the guardianship and physical custody of the minor child Lily, he announced, his voice booming through the silent room. I understand the petitioner has requested an immediate expedited hearing based on new evidentiary submissions. Harrison Thorne instantly stood up, buttoning his pinstripe suit jacket with an arrogant flourish. He stepped away from his table, addressing the judge with the smooth, practiced tone of a man accustomed to getting his way. Your Honor. Thorne began projecting his voice to ensure everyone in the gallery could hear his disdain. We heavily object to this entire proceeding. This emergency motion is nothing more than a desperate, frivolous tactic by an estranged and financially unstable mother. My clients Richard and Catherine have provided a luxurious, loving, and flawlessly stable environment for this orphaned child. The petitioner is wasting the court valuable time. We request this motion be dismissed immediately, and we will be seeking full compensation for our legal fees incurred by this harassment. Richard and Catherine nodded along, looking incredibly pleased with their high-priced bulldog. Beatrice actually let out a quiet, bored sigh from the gallery bench. Judge Mitchell looked over his glasses at Brenda Carmichael. Counsel, how do you respond to the respondent motion to dismiss? Brenda slowly stood up, smoothing her tailored skirt. She did not raise her voice. She did not engage in theatrical posturing. She simply looked at Harrison Thorne with the predatory calm of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Your Honor. Brenda stated, her voice slicing through the heavy silence of the courtroom like a scalpel. We are not here to discuss the luxurious environment the respondents claim to provide. We are here because my client daughter is in immediate life-threatening danger. We are here to present irrefutable evidence of severe child abuse, physical endangerment, and massive federal financial fraud. The entire courtroom froze. The smug smiles on my parents' faces instantly vanished. The judge lowered his files, leaning forward with sudden, sharp attention. The doors were closed. The trap was sprung. The execution was officially underway. Harrison Thorne slammed his hands flat against the respondent table. His face flushed a deep crimson as he struggled to process the sheer audacity of Brenda Carmichael's opening statement. Your Honor, this is an absolute outrage. Thorne bellowed, his voice vibrating with indignation. "These accusations are nothing more than a grotesque smear campaign manufactured by a desperate, estranged mother. My clients are pillars of the Connecticut community. They have opened their hearts and their $3 million home to provide their orphaned granddaughter with an unparalleled standard of living." Thorne stepped out from behind his table, gesturing wildly toward Richard and Catherine, who had quickly rearranged their shocked expressions back into masks of wounded dignity. "They provide this child with a private chef, organic meals, round-the-clock care, and the finest educational tutors in the state." Thorne continued, his voice dripping with righteous anger. "The petitioner is a minimum wage cleaner living in a dangerous neighborhood who cannot even afford basic health insurance. She is attempting to extort my clients and weaponize this courtroom to steal back a child she is financially and emotionally incapable of raising. We demand that these baseless accusations of abuse be stricken from the record immediately." Brenda Carmichael did not flinch. She allowed Thorne to finish his entire impassioned speech, letting his lies echo and settle into the official court record. She wanted him to paint the most elaborate, beautiful picture of my parents' fake generosity possible. It would make the incoming destruction so much more devastating. Brenda calmly adjusted the lapels of her suit jacket and looked up at the bench. "Your Honor, my opposing counsel has just submitted a very detailed verbal account regarding the luxurious and loving environment his clients allegedly provide. I request immediate permission to submit Exhibit A to the court. It is a direct digital recording from inside the respondent primary residence captured less than 48 hours ago. We believe it will efficiently clarify the exact standard of living the minor child is currently experiencing." Thorne immediately bristled. "Objection, Your Honor. We have not been provided with any digital discovery. You cannot ambush this court with unverified media. The media was secured and encrypted by a licensed forensic accountant, Your Honor." Brenda fired back smoothly, gesturing toward me in the gallery. "And due to the severe and immediate threat to the physical safety of the minor child, we filed this under an emergency ex parte motion, which bypasses standard discovery periods. The child life is in danger. We request to play the video now." Judge Mitchell frowned deeply, his eyes darting between the furious Harrison Thorne and the stone-cold Brenda Carmichael. He looked down at the sworn affidavit Brenda had filed alongside the motion. The judge's expression hardened. "I am allowing it," Judge Mitchell declared, striking his gavel once. Bailiff, lower the projector screen and dim the lights. The heavy motorized screen hummed as it descended from the ceiling directly behind the judge's bench. The bailiff hit a switch, plunging the courtroom into a tense, expectant darkness. I sat perfectly still in the second row, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I looked at my parents. Richard was whispering furiously to Thorne, who was shaking his head, looking completely blindsided. Catherine was clutching her diamond brooch, her knuckles turning white. Beatrice looked annoyed, crossing her arms and shifting in her seat, completely unaware of the absolute nightmare about to unfold on the massive screen above them. Brenda connected her encrypted laptop to the courtroom audiovisual system. She clicked a button. The projector flickered to life. The screen illuminated, filling the dark courtroom with a crystal-clear, high-definition view of my parents' lavish living room. The hidden camera inside the plush teddy bear had captured the entire space perfectly. The audio kicked in sharp and undeniable. The courtroom watched in absolute dead silence as the heavy oak door in the background of the video slowly creaked open. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery when Lily stepped into the frame. She looked horrifyingly small, swallowed by an oversized gray sweater, her face pale and gaunt. The judge leaned forward, entirely captivated by the screen, as Lily crept toward the kitchen island, moving with the terrified, silent stealth of a beaten animal. The court watched her desperately reach for a single discarded slice of dry toast. Then the audio spiked. Beatrice stormed into the frame wearing silk pajamas and brandishing a sharp nail file. The courtroom speakers blasted my sister's shrill, venomous voice for everyone to hear. "What do you think you are doing?" Beatrice shrieked on the screen, violently snatching the bread directly out of Lily's hands. The physical aggression made the 7-year-old stumble backward and hit the marble counter. "That is artisanal sourdough. You do not get to just sneak around and steal food like a street rat. If you are hungry, you can eat the stale crackers in the pantry. Now get back upstairs before you ruin my mood." I watched the color instantly drain from Beatrice's face in the courtroom. She sank down into her heavy leather chair, her mouth falling open in sheer panic. But the video was not over. The screen cut to the second clip. The timestamp showed late evening. The sound of clinking glasses from a dinner party echoed in the background. Lily wandered into the living room, clutching her stomach and crying. Then Catherine walked into the frame. The entire courtroom watched as the wealthy philanthropic grandmother slammed a silver wine bucket onto the table and grabbed the frail 7-year-old girl aggressively by the arm. "Why are you out here?" Catherine hissed on the massive screen, her face twisted with pure malice. "I told you to stay out of sight. My friends do not want to look at a miserable, sniveling child while they eat." The audio captured Lily sobbing, begging for her mother. The judge's face turned purple with outrage as Catherine's response echoed through the speakers. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. Your mother is a broke, pathetic loser who does not want you. If it were not for your trust fund keeping a roof over our heads, I would have thrown you in an orphanage the day your father died. You are nothing but a meal ticket to us. Now get back in that room and lock the door before I give them a reason to cancel the surgery." Brenda hit the pause button, freezing the horrific image of Catherine shoving the weeping child backward. The lights in the courtroom snapped back on. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was the sound of total, irreversible annihilation. I looked at the respondent table. The devastation was absolute. Catherine had buried her face in her hands, physically shaking, as she realized her high society reputation had just been publicly slaughtered. Richard looked like he was having a heart attack, his face gray and slick with sudden sweat. He stared at the frozen image of his wife committing child abuse, realizing their entire legal defense had just been incinerated. Beatrice was openly weeping in her chair, trying to hide her face behind her hair. Harrison Thorne, the expensive, ruthless bulldog lawyer, stood frozen at his podium. He looked from the projector screen down to his clients. The realization washed over him. His clients had lied to him. They had sent him into a federal courtroom to argue that they provided a loving, luxurious home while they were secretly starving and torturing the child on camera. Thorne slowly closed his legal briefcase, the loud click echoing in the silent room. He physically stepped away from Richard, refusing to even look at the man who had just destroyed his professional credibility. Judge Mitchell took off his glasses. His hands were visibly shaking with fury. He glared down at my parents with a look of absolute disgust. "I have sat on this bench for 22 years, Judge Mitchell said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I have never in my entire career witnessed a more grotesque display of cruelty masking as guardianship." Jasmine let out a quiet, ragged sob of pure relief beside her lawyer. The fake aristocratic empire had been shattered. But I knew the execution was only half finished. The child abuse was exposed, but the financial motive still needed to be ripped out into the light. I gripped my briefcase, waiting for my turn to strike. The heavy silence following the video was broken by the sharp sound of Brenda Carmichael clearing her throat. Before Richard could even attempt to formulate a lie to excuse the horrific child abuse displayed on the screen, Brenda struck her second blow. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "The physical and emotional torture of this child is only the symptom of a much larger, more sinister disease. To understand exactly why the respondents subjected this minor to such cruelty, we must examine their underlying motive. At this time, the petitioner calls Naomi to the stand as an expert forensic accounting witness." Harrison Thorne jumped to his feet, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is an estranged family member with a clear personal bias. She cannot be recognized as an impartial expert in this proceeding." Judge Mitchell glared down from the bench. "I will hear her credentials, counselor. Sit down." I stood up from the gallery bench, gripping the handle of my battered leather briefcase. I walked past my parents' table without giving them a single glance. I stepped into the witness box, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the whole truth. "Please state your name and profession for the record," Brenda requested, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "My name is Naomi," I stated clearly. I have been a certified forensic accountant for 10 years. I specialize in auditing corporate fraud, tracing offshore assets, and dismantling complex embezzlement schemes for federal task forces. Brenda nodded, retrieving the thick stack of ledgers I had prepared. Naomi, have you had the opportunity to conduct a comprehensive financial audit of the respondents, Richard and Catherine? I have, I replied, opening my briefcase and placing my master dossier on the wooden stand. I executed a deep dive into their public tax filings, property deeds, corporate portfolios, and linked financial accounts. And what did you discover regarding their current financial stability? I looked directly at my father. He was staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and growing terror. He finally realized that the quiet daughter he had dismissed as a background character was currently holding a scalpel to the throat of his entire legacy. I discovered that their wealth is a complete fabrication, I declared, my voice echoing in the cavernous courtroom. 2 years ago, Richard Primary Business Crown Development filed for Chapter 7, bankruptcy liquidation. He defaulted on multiple commercial loans. Furthermore, their primary residence is currently leveraged under 3 separate high-interest mortgages. They are severely delinquent on property taxes and facing imminent foreclosure. On paper, they are entirely destitute. A collective murmur swept through the courtroom. Catherine gripped the edge of her table, her knuckles white. Her high society image was being surgically dismantled on public record. If they are bankrupt, Brenda continued smoothly, how have they maintained their luxury lifestyle over the past 11 months? How are they paying for designer clothing and country club memberships? They are funding it by actively defrauding a deceased man estate, I answered. When my brother David passed away, he left a $5 million trust fund exclusively for the health, education, and maintenance of his daughter Lily. Richard and Catherine orchestrated a hostile legal takeover of Jasmine custody rights solely to gain administrative access to that capital. Objection! Thorne shouted, slamming his hand on the table. This is pure speculation. It is empirical mathematical fact, I countered, staring the expensive lawyer down. The trust administrator requires documented proof of expenditure before releasing funds. Because my parents were granted physical guardianship, they possess the legal standing to submit those requests. However, the invoices they have been submitting for the past 11 months are entirely fraudulent. I opened my dossier, pulling out the highlighted spreadsheets. I directed the judge's attention to Exhibit B. On November 4th, Richard requested $45,000 from the trust, citing a highly specialized therapeutic behavioral intervention program for Lily trauma recovery. I traced the outbound wire transfer number. The money did not go to a medical facility. It went directly to a luxury travel concierge in Manhattan. It purchased first-class tickets to Milan, a boutique hotel suite, and a private shopping guide for Beatrice. Beatrice let out a loud, panicked gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as the entire courtroom turned to stare at her. I pulled the next document. On December 2nd, they withdrew $12,000, claiming an emergency private school tuition deposit. The routing numbers show the cash was deposited directly into the accounting department of the Oak Ridge Country Club to cover Catherine delinquent social tab. In mid-January, an $80,000 withdrawal was categorized as an accessible transportation upgrade for the minor child. That exact sum was wired to a European auto dealership in Chicago to purchase a Porsche Cayenne registered exclusively in Richard's name. Judge Mitchell's face turned a deep shade of crimson. He aggressively flipped through the copies of the wire transfers Brenda had handed to the bailiff, verifying my claims in real time. To launder this money, I continued my pacing, relentless and sharp. Richard established a dummy corporation in Delaware called Apex Consulting. He submits the fake medical and educational invoices under this shell company, using fabricated billing codes. The trust administrator approves the disbursement, and the money is wired to Delaware. From there, Richard funnels the cash directly into his personal checking accounts to pay off his ballooning credit card debt and mortgage arrears. Brenda stepped closer to the witness box. Naomi, what is the total amount of money the respondents have siphoned from the minor child trust fund using this method? Over the past 11 months, they have successfully embezzled $1.2 million, I stated firmly. The child abuse you witnessed on the video was not a lapse in judgment. It is standard operating procedure. They are locking a grieving 7-year-old girl in a freezing closet and feeding her scraps, while aggressively draining her inheritance to fund their own aristocratic illusions. I then pulled out the final piece of paper, the trap from the night before. Just 48 hours ago, I continued, my voice rising to dominate the stunned silence of the room. Catherine contacted me hysterically, claiming Lily had a rare degenerative spinal condition. She attempted to extort $100,000 from me, demanding I take out a second mortgage on my own home to cover a fake out-of-network surgery. They planned to use my money to remodel their summer house in the Hamptons. They are not just stealing from the trust, Your Honor. They are actively running a predatory medical scam to defraud their own family members. The courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. Reporters in the gallery were frantically typing on their phones. Jasmine sat at her table, tears of vindication streaming down her face as the people who had destroyed her life were finally exposed. Richard looked like he was suffocating, his chest heaving as he loosened his expensive silk tie. Catherine was shaking her head in frantic denial, but the mathematical evidence sitting on the judge's bench was an impenetrable wall of guilt. Harrison Thorne sank into his chair, his face buried in his hands. He was a ruthless lawyer, but he was not suicidal. He knew he had just walked into a federal ambush. His clients had handed him a live grenade, and I had just pulled the pin. The financial guillotine had dropped perfectly, severing their fake empire from reality and exposing them as the calculating, ruthless parasites they truly were. Judge Mitchell struck his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block 3 times. The sharp cracks echoed like gunshots, instantly silencing the chaotic murmurs in the gallery. "Order in this court!" The judge bellowed, his face flushed with residual anger. He turned his piercing gaze toward the respondent table. "Mr. Thorne, you have exactly 2 minutes to explain why I should not have your clients immediately remanded into federal custody for gross embezzlement." Harrison Thorne slowly stood up. The initial shock that had paralyzed him just moments ago was gone. He was a $1,000 an hour defense attorney who specialized in rescuing wealthy criminals from the consequences of their own arrogance. He smoothed the front of his pinstripe suit, picked up a legal pad, and stepped up to the podium. The panic on his face was entirely replaced by a mask of smooth, calculated confidence. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice projecting calm authority, "what we have just witnessed is a highly dramatic presentation by a disgruntled, estranged daughter. However, drama is not the law. While the accounting presented by the witness may look alarming out of context, I assure this court that no explicit criminal statutes have been violated." I gripped the edge of the witness stand. My nails bit into the varnished wood. I stared at Thorne, entirely appalled by his immediate pivot. Thorne opened his legal pad. He did not look at my parents, who were sweating profusely behind him. "My clients were granted full legal and physical guardianship of the minor child," Thorne stated smoothly. "Under the Uniform Prudent Investor Act and established precedents regarding primary guardianship of high net worth estates, guardians are granted broad discretionary rights. They have a fiduciary duty to maintain a standard of living commensurate with the lifestyle the child was accustomed to prior to the loss of her parent." Brenda Carmichael stood up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is attempting to sanitize felony wire fraud as household maintenance. Buying a sports car does not maintain a child's standard of living." "I will allow it for now," Judge Mitchell said, waving Brenda down, though his expression remained incredibly stern. "Continue, counselor, but tread very carefully." Thorne offered a slight respectful bow to the bench. "Thank you, Your Honor. The petitioner claims my clients embezzled funds. I argue they simply allocated trust resources to optimize the household where the child resides. The $80,000 vehicle purchase, a necessary upgrade to a high-safety rated all-wheel drive vehicle to ensure the minor could be safely transported during harsh Connecticut winters. The $12,000 country club renewal, an essential networking expense to maintain the family social standing, thereby securing the minor future admission into elite private educational institutions. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. He was twisting reality into a grotesque legal pretzel. And the $45,000 trip to Milan. Brenda snapped from her table, unable to contain her disgust. Did the child need Italian leather to survive the winter? Thorne did not miss a beat. The trip to Milan was respite care. Beatrice serves as a secondary caregiver in the home. Given the extreme emotional toll of managing a traumatized grieving child, my clients utilized their discretionary latitude to fund a mental health retreat for the secondary caregiver, ensuring a stable household dynamic upon her return. I looked over at Jasmine. She was staring at Thorne with absolute horror. Her hands were shaking violently. The system was doing it again. A wealthy white lawyer in an expensive suit was using sophisticated vocabulary to legally justify the starvation and robbery of a black widow and her child. As for the so-called fraudulent invoices, Thorne continued raising his voice to dominate the room. My clients are simply not professional accountants. They utilized a family-owned consulting entity to manage the complex logistics of sudden guardianship. They may have been sloppy with their internal categorization codes, and they may have used aggressive financial maneuvering to stabilize their own properties. But commingling assets under a broad discretionary trust is a civil compliance issue, not a federal crime. They were maintaining the estate where the minor lives. Without a roof over her head, the child would be destitute. Therefore, keeping the estate afloat is a direct benefit to the minor. The courtroom was dead silent. I looked at Judge Mitchell. The furious red flush had left his face, replaced by a heavy, calculating frown. He was looking down at his legal monitor, pulling up the exact statutes Thorne had just cited. The air in the room grew suffocatingly thick. Thorne was using the legal concept of fiduciary latitude. If a trust document was written with overly broad language, a guardian could theoretically justify almost any expense as a household necessity. If they bought a yacht, they could claim it was for the child recreational therapy. If they bought a mansion, they could claim it was for the child's security. As long as the child lived under their roof, the line between embezzlement and maintenance became terrifyingly blurry. The law is not about morality. It is about what can be proven within the rigid confines of written statutes. Thorne was arguing that my parents were just terrible bookkeepers who overcharged for their services. Sloppy bookkeeping results in a civil fine. It does not result in prison time. It definitely does not guarantee a reversal of custody. Your Honor. Thorne concluded, closing his pad with a sharp snap. My clients made administrative errors while trying to navigate a sudden tragic guardianship. But the funds were ultimately absorbed into the household ecosystem. We request that the motion to terminate custody be denied, and that this financial dispute be moved to civil mediation where the accounting errors can be properly audited and corrected. I felt a cold sweat break out across the back of my neck. I looked at Brenda. Her jaw was tight. She was frantically flipping through the trust documents, trying to find a counter-argument to the discretionary rights precedent. The legal loophole was massive. Richard and Catherine could simply promise to pay back the overcharged amounts over the next 20 years, utilizing the exact same trust fund they were accused of draining to cover the settlement. They could walk out of this courthouse today completely free, still holding Lily as their financial hostage. Judge Mitchell sighed, rubbing his chin. He looked from Thorne to Brenda, and then directly at me. I sat frozen in the witness box, the horrific realization washing over me. I had tracked every single dollar. I had proven their bankruptcy. I had captured their abuse on video. But because they were legally appointed guardians, they held the ultimate trump card. They had the legal right to manage the money. Counselor, Judge Mitchell said slowly, addressing Thorne, "Your interpretation of discretionary household maintenance is incredibly aggressive. However, absent explicit restrictive language in the original trust charter regarding the commingling of administrative fees, I cannot immediately classify this as criminal embezzlement without a full federal inquiry." A collective gasp escaped the gallery. Richard let out a loud, arrogant sigh of relief, leaning back in his chair and adjusting his cuffs. Catherine actually smiled, a small, vicious smirk directed straight at Jasmine. Beatrice pulled out her phone, her terror completely vanishing as she realized her expensive lawyer had just saved her luxury lifestyle. Jasmine let out a broken whimper, clutching the edge of her table. They were going to get away with it. They had bought their way out of hell using my dead brother money. The financial guillotine had stalled inches from their necks, caught on a technicality of upper-class legal privilege. I stared at the judge, my mind frantically searching for a solution. I was a forensic accountant. I did not lose to dirty lawyers. But as I watched Judge Mitchell reach for his gavel to issue a ruling, I realized I had no more ammunition left to fire. Then the judge stopped. His hand hovered over the wooden handle. He looked down at the massive pile of documents on his desk. Specifically, he pulled out the original heavily sealed trust charter that David, estate lawyer, had filed with the court during the initial probate hearings. "Wait a moment," Judge Mitchell murmured, his brow furrowing deeply. He adjusted his glasses and began reading a specific addendum attached to the very back of the file. An addendum that Harrison Thorne had completely overlooked in his rush to defend the fraud. The courtroom held its breath as the judge's eyes scanned the page. The heavy silence in the courtroom stretched into an agonizing eternity. Judge Mitchell flipped the heavy parchment page back and forth, examining the notary seal stamped at the bottom corner. He looked up, locking his eyes directly onto Harrison Thorne. "Counselor," Judge Mitchell said, his voice cutting through the tension like a whip. "When you reviewed the primary trust documentation, did you happen to read Appendix C4? Harrison Thorne froze. The polished, arrogant demeanor he had worn just moments ago completely vanished. He frantically scrambled through his massive stack of files, his expensive pen clattering onto the floor. His associate lawyers began aggressively turning pages, pulling up digital copies on their laptops. "Your Honor," Thorne stammered, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. "My team reviewed the entire standard portfolio regarding the guardianship disbursements. We focused on the primary administrative clauses." "Then you missed the tripwire," Judge Mitchell replied bluntly. "This document was heavily sealed. The cover letter from the late David Wilson estate attorney specifically instructed the probate court that this addendum was only to be unsealed and entered into the active record if the appointed guardians ever faced an audit or a formal motion regarding financial misconduct. The petitioner filing today triggered that exact condition." I sat perfectly still in the witness box. Jasmine gasped softly from her table. David had known. My brilliant, meticulous brother had anticipated this exact nightmare. He knew our parents would hide behind expensive lawyers and exploit legal loopholes. He knew they would try to disguise their theft as household maintenance. "Let me read this out loud for the court to ensure we have complete clarity regarding discretionary rights," Judge Mitchell announced, adjusting his glasses. He held the document up, the heavy paper rustling in the quiet room. "This is a direct conditional mandate drafted by the deceased. It states in plain, undeniable language, I, David Wilson, recognize the severe financial distress of my parents Richard and Catherine Wilson resulting from their corporate bankruptcy." A collective shockwave rolled through the gallery. Richard let out a choked sound, covering his face. His carefully guarded secret, the bankruptcy he had hidden from his high society friends, was now a matter of permanent public court record. The judge ignored the disruption and continued reading. "Under no circumstances whatsoever are my parents to be granted discretionary financial access to this trust for the purpose of housing maintenance, debt consolidation, or lifestyle preservation. Any withdrawal exceeding $1,000 must be verified by a secondary independent auditor." The color rapidly drained from my mother's face. Catherine gripped the edge of the table so hard her manicured nails looked ready to snap off. Beatrice actually stopped breathing, her eyes wide with mounting terror. Thorne stood paralyzed at his podium, his entire legal strategy obliterated by a dead man foresight. But the document does not end there. Judge Mitchell continued, his voice rising with absolute judicial authority. "The clause explicitly outlines a zero-tolerance fail-safe." The judge cleared his throat, holding the paper higher. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from tense to completely explosive as he prepared to read the final lethal command. "Should my parents, Richard and Catherine, attempt to alienate my daughter Lily from her mother Jasmine, or assume physical or legal guardianship, this entire trust is immediately frozen." Judge Mitchell read, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "Furthermore, a mandatory retroactive audit is automatically triggered, granting full and irrevocable power of attorney over all financial assets directly to my sister Naomi." The gavel could not have struck a harder blow. Richard physically collapsed back into his heavy leather chair, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Catherine let out a high-pitched wail of pure disbelief, gripping the edges of the defense table so tightly, her knuckles bruised. The firewall David had built was not just a legal barrier. It was a complete financial guillotine designed to sever their access the exact moment they tried to steal his child from her mother. My brother had stripped them of their power and handed the keys directly to the forensic accountant of the family. I sat in the witness box feeling a profound, overwhelming surge of pride for David. He had protected his family from the grave. "But we are not finished, Your Honor," Brenda Carmichael announced, breaking through the stunned murmurs of the courtroom gallery. The addendum filed by the late David Wilson included a digital exhibit intended to clarify his exact state of mind and intent should this trigger clause ever be activated. "We request to play the attached video file now." Judge Mitchell nodded immediately, gesturing to the audiovisual system. "Proceed, counselor. I want to see everything." The massive projector screen lowered once again. The horrific footage of the living room vanished, replaced by a crisp recording of my older brother. David sat behind his office desk, looking directly into the camera lens. He looked exhausted, but his eyes burned with a fierce, protective intensity. Seeing his face again, hearing his familiar voice fill the quiet courtroom, brought sudden hot tears to Jasmine's eyes. She covered her mouth, weeping quietly at the sight of her late husband defending her. "I am recording this as a sworn legal declaration," David stated on the screen, his voice completely unwavering. "I have recently uncovered that my parents, Richard and Catherine, are entirely bankrupt. They have requested massive financial bailouts to save their failing estate, and I have explicitly refused. I know exactly what they are capable of doing when they are desperate for cash." David leaned closer to the camera, his expression turning utterly lethal. "If you are watching this in a courtroom, it means I am dead, and my parents have attempted to steal my daughter from her rightful mother, Jasmine. They do not care about Lily. They only care about the $5 million I am leaving behind to secure her future. They will use their country club connections, their fake philanthropy, and their expensive lawyers to paint Jasmine as an unfit mother. They will leverage racial bias and financial disparity to steal my child. Do not believe a single word they say. I expressly and unequivocally forbid Richard and Catherine from coming anywhere near my daughter." The video abruptly stopped, leaving David commanding protective presence hovering over the frozen courtroom. The silence was absolute and suffocating. Harrison Thorne looked physically ill, slowly packing his briefcase. My parents had just been completely destroyed by the undeniable voice of their own dead son. Judge Mitchell did not hesitate for a single second. He brought his heavy wooden gavel down with a deafening crack that made my mother physically flinch in her seat. "Based on the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence presented to this court, I am immediately and permanently terminating the emergency guardianship granted to Richard and Catherine Wilson," the judge declared, his voice booming with righteous fury. "Full legal and physical custody of the minor child, Lily, is hereby restored unconditionally to her mother, Jasmine." Jasmine collapsed forward, covering her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. The heavy, suffocating weight of the past year finally lifted off her shoulders. But the judge was not finished. Furthermore, Judge Mitchell continued, locking his sharp eyes on my terrified parents. "I am holding both respondents in direct contempt of court for egregious perjury and the submission of fraudulent medical documents. And because the empirical evidence submitted by the forensic accountant details severe cross-state financial crimes, I took the liberty of making a very specific phone call before taking the bench today." The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom suddenly swung wide open. Two armed federal marshals stepped inside their badges, catching the overhead lights, followed closely by a team of local police officers. "Richard and Catherine Wilson," Judge Mitchell announced, leaning over the bench. "You are hereby remanded into federal custody, pending immediate indictment for felony wire fraud, grand embezzlement, and severe child endangerment. Officers, take them away." Absolute pandemonium erupted. My mother let out a blood-curdling shriek as a federal marshal grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around her wrists. Richard tried to resist, shouting frantically for Harrison Thorne to file an injunction, but his expensive bulldog lawyer had already walked out the side door, abandoning him completely. My parents were dragged down the center aisle crying and screaming about their ruined social reputation, while the entire gallery watched in absolute disgust. Beatrice was left standing entirely alone by the defense table, trembling violently. She looked at me, her face twisted in pure, unfiltered panic. "Naomi," she begged, her arrogant, high society facade completely shattered into pieces. "You have to help me. They took my platinum cards. The bank is seizing the estate today. I do not have a job. I have nowhere to go." I looked at my 30-year-old sister, feeling absolutely zero pity. "You should have thought about that before you stole a grieving child therapy fund to buy Italian leather," I replied, my voice ice cold. "Go find a homeless shelter, Beatrice. Your free ride is officially over." I turned my back on her hysterical screaming and walked over to Jasmine. The side doors of the courtroom opened one last time, and a social worker gently led Lily inside. The 7-year-old girl saw her mother and broke into a dead sprint. Jasmine fell to her knees on the hard floor, catching her daughter in a fierce, desperate embrace. They clung to each other, weeping with pure, unadulterated joy. The nightmare had finally ended. I picked up my battered leather briefcase and walked out the front doors of the federal courthouse. The freezing winter storm had finally cleared, leaving behind a brilliant, blinding blue sky. The warm sunlight washed over my face as I stood on the concrete steps. I had completely dismantled a toxic aristocratic empire and burned their fake legacy straight to the ground. I had saved the only family that actually mattered. Blood does not automatically make a family. Respect, unconditional love, and fierce protection do. Have you ever had to stand up and destroy a toxic family dynamic to protect the innocent people you love? Share your story in the comments below. The harrowing story of Naomi, Jasmine, and Lily serves as a powerful testament to one profound lesson: biology does not automatically equate to family. The narrative strips away the societal illusion that blood relatives will inherently protect and nurture us, revealing a darker reality where greed and status can easily override basic human decency. Throughout the story, Richard and Catherine hide their severe financial and moral bankruptcy behind a pristine, carefully curated facade of upper-class philanthropy. They use their orphaned granddaughter not as a cherished child to be loved, but as a literal financial hostage to maintain their luxurious lifestyle and social standing. Their willingness to subject an innocent 7-year-old to freezing isolation and starvation while publicly parading as benevolent saviors demonstrates how toxic individuals often wear masks of virtue to conceal their absolute lack of empathy. However, the true power of this lesson is embodied in Naomi's response. She recognizes that genuine familial duty sometimes requires tearing down the very institution of family in order to protect the vulnerable. Armed with undeniable forensic facts and an unwavering resolve, she systematically dismantles her parents' fraudulent empire to rescue Lily and Jasmine. Naomi's relentless pursuit of justice teaches us that true love is an active, fiercely protective force. It requires the immense courage to stand up to your own blood when they become the oppressors, choosing the safety of the innocent over maintaining a toxic artificial peace. Ultimately, we learn that a real family is earned through compassion, accountability, and a willingness to shield one another from harm, regardless of shared DNA or societal expectations. If you recognize these toxic patterns within your own life, find the courage to draw an ironclad boundary today and fiercely protect your peace.